We'll watch that closely in Boston. In the meantime, Iran is now supporting its longtime enemy in Afghanistan, the Taliban, the militant group the U.S. worked to overthrow shortly after 9/11. This is according to reports from the Wall Street Journal that Iran is sending weapons and money to the Taliban, and this is increasing right now, apparently to counter the growth of ISIS in Afghanistan, as well as residual American influence there. So let's explore this a little bit with Ben Collins, U.S. Army Special Forces veteran and Green Beret, who served 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan, so very familiar with the country. Ben, that's the key to this news, is that it's increasing now, according to the Wall Street Journal, that Iran is sending more money and more weapons to the Taliban. Why?
Well, it certainly is, and as you mentioned, it's nothing new. So we did catch large shipments of weapons coming across the Iranian border into Afghanistan in 2007 and 2011, and there were significant number of weapons. And I think at this point right now, Iran is watching what's occurring between the Taliban and the centralized government and thinking that, perhaps there's the opportunity that the Taliban is going to actually come to a little bit more power. And so I think they're hedging their bets, really.
Because they want influence in Afghanistan.
Correct.
Why would they want the influence in Afghanistan?
Well, I think it's twofold. One, they're watching, the Sunni, led insurgency. They're seeing some of the pockets of ISIS rise in Afghanistan. And also, to be blunt, they really just want to get in the way of the United States.
Interesting. Talk to us about ISIS there in Afghanistan, because we've heard a few different stories of ISIS groups popping up in Afghanistan. How legit is that ISIS is going to Afghanistan, of all places?
So I think a lot of it is mid-level commanders that are pretty frustrated with the Taliban. They certainly haven't seen Mullah Omar, who's the leader, in years. And right now, ISIS is the hot new brand. But let's be very clear about something, right? Is that I think if there's anything that's going to unite Afghanis, it's essentially outsiders. And so ISIS, I don't think, has a very long-term life in Afghanistan. I mean, and certainly the way their level of violence doesn't really isn't going to sit well with the Afghan populace.
Let's take a step back, though, from the region, because Iran is excellent at multitasking, apparently.
Certainly.
Right? They have, they're meddling in Afghanistan, according to these reports. Of course, you look at them in Yemen, Syria, Iraq, and beyond. How do we compare when we look at what we're doing in the region to gain influence to Iran?
Well, I think what it shows really is this administration, they're certainly not blind, but I think they're naive. One of the components of the nuclear deal is that they will receive sanctions relief. And I've seen numbers up to $100 to $120 billion of money that will be released into Iran's hands. And so my concern is if we have pulled back from that region, how troublesome is Iran going to be with $120 billion behind them? And as you said, and to be honest, that's another reason I think why that Iran has some concern about Kabul. Kabul came out and supported the fight against the Houthi rebels in Yemen, and so I think part of this is Iran's kind of paying them back for that.
So it's an interesting taking it full circle, saying if this is what Iran is doing with the Taliban, even on a small level, increasing money and weapons, what do they do if the sanctions are released? How big could their influence apparently be? What would be our move, though? Let's just say in Afghanistan, you've spent a great deal of time there. We've lost lives in Afghanistan. If Iran is doing this meddling with the Taliban, we certainly don't want to compete with influence for the Taliban. So what's our move?
No, we don't. And I think that's why we have to really look at the way that we actually withdraw. So I think, again, also when we signed the bilateral agreement with Afghanistan, part of that is keeping a lot of troops and bases that are along the Iranian and the Afghanistan border, which, of course, Iran is not happy with at all. And so I think we need to relook the strategy of withdrawal out of Afghanistan. And as you and I have talked before, either we have a clear and concise mission, right, and we give our soldiers that are still on the ground something to actually affect and something clear guidance. Otherwise, I think we're essentially just kind of playing with fire in terms, and I think our guys could get hurt without lack of a clear mission.
Does that same strategy apply to how we deal with Iran, whatever comes of this nuclear deal?
Of course. And again, I think it speaks again to the naivete of the administration. What occurs on paper certainly is not going to be the reality. And really, we're arguing about 13 years worth, right? Because after 13 years, they have the ability to enrich uranium, with a breakout time near zero. And so that, to me, is extremely concerning. And they're showing their influence all over, as you said, Syria and Yemen, now Afghanistan. So, I mean, they're really making a hegemonic play here. So
if we're thinking that we invested a lot of time, money, and lives in Afghanistan, what will it look like if Iran does go nuclear? And what will our investments look like? That's a big question for the road ahead. Great to have you. Always, Ben. Thank you. John?